Mirrors by Greensearcher, Chapter 12. What is all this commotion? Cogsworth was hushed by a dozen servants at once, all gathered around together in the northern wing. All were fighting for a peek between the banisters towards the landing across and below, whispering excitedly amongst themselves. Huffing to himself, the head of the household pushed his way through the small crowd. Certain, nothing could be so interesting as to justify half the morning staff neglecting their duties. Before he could even make out the source of their whispers, a waxy arm found its way around his shoulders. "Look at that, mon ami!" "Do you know what this means?" Lumiere whispered excitedly. "Look at what?" the old clock said, brushing off the man irritably. "Their holiday hats!" One of the maids practically squealed, hushed by several others around her. In the hall below, the master's ears twitched at the noise, but he only offered a passing glance in their direction before letting his gaze fall back to the young woman at his side, whose hand Cogsworth noted was indeed encased in the master's own. "I saw it first," another woman said with pride. "Caught them sneaking out of the library at dawn. Couldn't have been 6:30. "Do you think they were in there all night?" "Hush, we shouldn't assume anything. He must have asked her to court him." "That a lad." An older fellow nodded. "Always knew he had it in him." The young couple continued further down the corridor, stopping when the master leaned down and whispered something into Belle's ear. She giggled quietly in response, sending several more maids into mild hysteria. "Ah, yes, well, very good, very good," Cogsworth conceded, trying to conceal his own pleasure at this new development, as he waved the crowds away from their impromptu observation deck. "But then, why hasn't the curse broken?" someone whispered as they headed downstairs. "Doesn't she love him yet?" "Or perhaps he doesn't love her." "Are you kidding?" Another man laughed. "He's been head over heels for the girl for weeks now." "Besides, they have to say the words aloud, remember? Declare your love or some nonsense like that." "Well, what's he waiting for?" "I'm sure he'll do it soon." "But when?" "If you ask me, we'll be human again by midnight." At that, Lumiere quite literally brightened, pushing his way to the front of the crowd. "Place your bets here, mes amis," he cried, waving his arms to gather their attention. "A week? A day? An hour? What'll it be? Winner takes the pot." Cogsworth bristled at that. There will be no gambling on these premises," he declared sternly, trying and failing to get the attention of the objects now gathered around the maitre d', who had somehow produced a quill and parchment and had already noted half a dozen bets on the surface. "These are the master's affairs," the Cogsworth continued with some desperation. We shouldn't." "Cogsworth is quite right," someone spoke. The old clock turned around, noticing Mrs. Potts had appeared before them, one painted brow raised at the chattering crowd. They fell immediately silent. "Well, Cogsworth cleared his throat, nodding towards her. "Thank you, Mrs. Potts. I'm glad someone else sees reason." "But, my dear Mrs. Potts," Cogsworth interjected, "haven't you seen the master and his sherry? It can't be long now, and we've waited for so long." "We have. And we can wait a little more, I dare say," she said matter-of-factly. "After all, we don't want to scare the poor girl off when she's made such a difficult decision." "Difficult?" someone asked. "Well, yes. We cannot forget. Belle does not know the master can be human once again. She must have accepted the courtship, realizing it could only end in a union with the master as he is now," Mrs. Potts explained. "The dear girl must have dealt with some very confusing feelings about it. No doubt still is." The crowd was silent, those with head-like appendages nodding in understanding. "Un ange," Lumiere said reverently, touching his heart. Or at least where it would be if he still had one. "An angel, indeed," Mrs. Potts agreed. "Now, let's get the young people some breakfast, and say nothing of it. Best to mind your own business and let things progress as they should." The servants nodded reluctantly, the crowd dispersing as they began to move in the direction of their morning tasks. "However," the old pot went on, causing them all to pause in their tracks, "interfering is not the same as helping things along." She smiled. "I dare say we work hard and make this the best Christmas the palace has seen. At that, several smiles broke out among the crowd. "Ah, oui, that really do the trick." Lumiere grinned, flames sparking in excitement as animated conversations returned to the hall. "Footmen, come with me," he ordered. We are going to deck these halls like nothing you have ever seen. Line break. Adam sat on the couch, book open in his lap, to the same page it were half an hour ago. In the same time, Belle had already read through several chapters of her own, clearly immersed in the story as she held the book in one hand and Adam's paw in the other. She would pull away periodically to turn a page, but then always slide her fingers back into his. During an especially intense section, Adam noticed her grip tighten as she bit her lip and sucked in a breath of anticipation, unconsciously pressing herself closer against him. Adam smiled, chest somehow flooding with more warmth than it already were. He loved watching Belle read. Before today, he had always made himself look away after a few moments, but now things had progressed. He felt it was all right to let his gaze linger. Adam had sometimes wondered how things would change between him and Belle, if they ever would. But it turned out their relationship was still very much the same, in all the best ways. They still cared for the horses, and took long walks through the woods and ate together, and found some new wonder to explore in the enchanted mirror every evening. They even attempted to work on the index every day before inevitably settling down to read something that had caught their interest. Though some things are definitely different. He smiled, looking back down at their joined hands. To his surprise, it seemed Belle craved the closeness they now had as much as he did. As if reading his thoughts, she closed the book and set it aside, curling her fingers tighter in his paw and weaving her free arm around his elbow, tucking her legs beneath her. Belle pressed herself even closer to him, closing her eyes as a pleasant smile crossed her lips. Tossing his own unread text away, Adam squeezed her hand carefully, the reality of how far things had come still leaving him breathless. He thought back to the day she had first appeared and smiled. Question, he whispered. Belle hummed, looking up at him with soft eyes. Why did you first come here? She looked surprised. To repay you, of course, she said adamantly. Yeah, he said, waving the response off. But what was the real reason? Belle grinned a little, cheeks growing pink. I was curious, she admitted, and bored. A hearty laugh escaped him. I know it! Belle grinned. Hey, laugh all you want, she said, clearly trying to suppress a smile. Without me, you wouldn't be having roast duck for Christmas dinner. He chuckled again, resting his head atop hers as his heart swelled once again. As though that were the reason he was most glad she was here. Pulling back, he gazed back down at her fondly. Today, instead of her characteristic ponytail, Belle had kept most of her hair down, the top tied up in a small ribbon. He reached up, curling his fingers back in a moment of hesitation, before tucking that stray lock of hair behind her ear. He let his fingers linger in the soft waves against her shoulder. A pleasant sigh escaped Belle's lips, giving him the courage to repeat the motion. His fingers brushed the ends of her ribbon this time, and he suddenly imagined tugging it loose, letting his fingers slide through the length of her hair. He pulled away. Basically, I'm gonna censor that. No, imagining it wasn't enough. Oh, what's the matter? Belle asked as he said, Nothing at all. I'm fine. Completely, absolutely fine. He stammered like an idiot. Just, getting more firewood. Belle glanced at the roaring fire, but only smiled. Okay, she said happily, reaching over for her book and cozying back up in the corner of the couch to await his return. Adam escaped quickly, emerging into the bitter air a few minutes later. He let himself fall back on the snow, staring up at the clear sky overhead. Whatever the enchantress might have told him, it was becoming more and more obvious that his instincts were those of a man, not a beast. He raised his paw above him, reminding himself what he was. Their large outlines blocked out the sun up above, and he sighed. Strangely, the dissonance between mind and body seemed to have grown even worse lately than it had been when he had first changed. He didn't feel like a beast anymore. He wondered if he ever really had. You sleep on a rug, he reminded himself. But wouldn't anyone if their body was more comfortable that way? I can't really eat food very cleanly, he acknowledged, thinking of the molars resting far in the back of his mouth. But then again, that just wasn't an instinct as so much as a condition. just like he could climb trees or carve marks in their bark, or run fast on all fours. It wasn't as though he really felt the need to do any of those things. He just took advantage of them when they became useful. And his feelings for Belle, those were obviously human. He wanted to make her feel happy and safe, and, well, frankly, he really wanted to kiss her. Just the night before, he had to physically reach up and feel the fangs protruding from his lip to remind himself that this was definitely not an option. He smiled a little, in spite of himself.
Maybe I was never really a beast after all.
Master, what are you doing? Adam grimaced, sitting up to see the castle's maitre d' hopping towards him from the grounds. It's frigid out today. I could barely get a light. Lumiere went on, a meager spark shooting from the end of one golden limb.
I was just,
Adam started, clearing his throat in discomfort.
I just got a little hot.
Lumiere suddenly flashed a wicked grin. You know, Master, it's perfectly normal if you begin to feel...
I don't want to talk about it,
Adam groaned, burying his face in his palms and paws in embarrassment. You know, my lord, it's just occurred to me that given your circumstances, it's possible that no one ever explained to you how...
Oh my God, Lumiere, please stop,
he begged, looking around in a panic in case anyone was eavesdropping.
I know how it works,
he hissed. Of course. The candlestick went on, indifferent to his master's mortification. However, there's much more to pleasing a woman than...
I know, Adam cried. Look, Lumiere, I really don't think I need to start worrying about this anytime soon. I should probably focus on becoming, human first,
he explained, waving a hand pointedly over his fame. Certainly, my lord, Lumiere agreed. When were you, thinking that might happen? Adam bit his lip nervously, looking into his lap. When was he planning on telling Belle that he loved her? Oh, forgive me, the maitre d' said quickly. All in good time, I'm sure. But perhaps... He paused, looking around before going on. Perhaps you would not object to the aid of my good footman and myself in providing the requisite ambience, he said quietly. Adam raised an eyebrow. Just picture this, master, Lumiere said earnestly, hopping over and placing a waxy arm on his shoulder. There will be music, romantic candlelight, provided by myself, he said, waving a golden arm across the snowy landscape, as if painting the scene itself before them.
Yeah,
Adam agreed with a lopsided smile. And when the moment is right, you confess your love, the candelabra explained, pulling away as his flames sparked in excitement, though the cold quickly extinguished them.
Yes,
Adam stopped, swallowing roughly, and suddenly feeling terribly anxious.
Why?
He wondered. Adam recalled the new intimacy that had awoken between them just days before. He knew Belle felt something for him. That much was obvious now, and it was not enough to make his heart sore. But did she love him? Master, you care for the girl, don't you? Lumiere asked carefully.
More than anything, Adam replied with all his heart. But I still don't know if I'm ready for this,
he admitted, ducking his head. Don't fret, master. The rose was to last till your 21st year, no? We still have until March. Plenty of time, Lumiere assured him. Adam nodded slowly. As promised, the rose had bloomed until his 20th birthday, or in other words, the beginning of his 21st year of life, and had wilted slowly in the month since. The first petal fell in late May, another handful by the summer's end, and over twice as many since. Still, the witch said it would last through the final year, and as much as he despised the woman, he had to trust her word on it. After all, why would she lie about this? You'll know when the time is right, Lumiere was saying. Adam looked up, but for a moment, Lumiere's usual gusto fell into a warm smile of a friend. And when you do, the man added, his flashy grin reappearing, we'll be there to make it a night to remember. Adam let a small smile tug at the corner of his own mouth. He knew everyone in the household must be anxious for him to say the words. But if Lumiere, of all people, could show such patience, certainly the rest of them could. Besides, while Belle's presence meant ending the curse for everyone else, she meant so much more to him. He wanted to do this right, to tell her when it felt right, not just to break the curse and be done with it. For, even when all was said and done, even with a human body and his freedom, and maybe even his kingdom, Belle would still matter the most to him.
Line break. Ouch!
Adam pulled back his thumb, now burning red through his fur, sticking it into his mouth as the finger flooded with pain. An expletive or two crossed his mind as he glared at the hammer in his other hand, the crooked wooden beams on the workshop table looking nothing like the diagram in the open book to his left. He cursed it out this time. This wasn't working at all. Master? Adam started, looking around to see a suit of armour leaning against the door frame, arms crossed as if amused by him.
Oh, hi, Sophie,
he said in chagrin. My lord, she started, moving over and looking at the mess before him. I don't wish to pry, but what are you doing? He pursed his lips, sucking in a breath before sighing deeply.
Trying to make that,
he admitted, pointing to the book. Sophie turned towards it, cocking her head. What is it?
An artist's easel, he explained.
For Belle?
He rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, he smiled,
in spite of himself.
For Christmas. I was thinking, she painted all those plates, but I don't think she's ever had the right materials to do much more than sketch before.
Sophie hummed for a moment, looking around the workshop. What about that one? She asked, pointing to an old tripod in the corner. I bet if you sand it down and restain it, it'll do the job.
But it's so old, and there's a couple of deep dents in it already, he said adamantly, turning back and picking up the book to show her. Besides, this one folds up, so she could carry it outside and paint landscapes like she enjoys.
Sophie was silent, and given her face was a helmet, it was impossible to read her expression. Master, she said at last. He said absently, still frowning at the diagram in his hands. You're an enormous sweetheart. Do you realise that?
What?
He said in embarrassment. Sophie laughed. Tell you what. I know Timothy has some experience with woodworking, so we'll get him to talk you through it. But you're going to need more than that, she said, placing her hands on her hips. You're going to need paint. Adam's paw flew to his forehead.
Oh, of course,
he recalled, frowning deeply. There were barely enough left when she painted last. They had plenty of empty canvases, considering the poor palace artisan had been transformed into a footstool. The man hadn't used any of them in 10 years. But what good was an easel and blank canvases with nothing but old dried-up paint? Don't worry, my lord, she said, raising a little finger. I've got an idea. Line break.
Ginger!
Every occupant of the large kitchen turned towards the stove, now steaming in irritation after his outcry. What is it now, Chef Bouche? Mrs. Potts asked in exasperation. Unlike the rest of them, the old stove had only grown more irritable with the coming celebration, and even her patience with him was growing thin. We don't have ginger! He cried. How can I make pain d'épices without ginger? I'm sure Master and Mademoiselle will survive without it, the teapot said. Aren't you already making 3 other desserts for them? As if on cue, the young couple came in through the back door, shaking off the snow from their cloaks, unaware of what they were walking into. But what is a Christmas feast without gingerbread? The chef went on. I will not tolerate such a stain on my reputation. Mrs. Potts rolled her porcelain eyes. Oh, for the love of...
Whoa, what's going on?
Adam asked innocently. A little too innocently, Mrs. Potts noted, though she only shook her head. Seems we're out of ginger. Looks like you two will have to give up your gingerbread this year. To her shock, the master frowned deeply and brought his hand to his chin.
Can't have that, he said seriously.
If Mrs. Potts had a jaw, it would have fallen down. She could barely count on the fingers of the non-existent hand the number of times the boy had ever complained in his life. And for him to do so now, over something so trivial? Looks like we'll have to make another trip into town, Sophie said, appearing out of nowhere from atop the stairs. Oui? Yep, time for a girls' outing. Sophie said brightly, gallivanting down the staircase and placing a metal hand on Belle's shoulder. Unlike the master and Sophie, Belle seemed completely perplexed by the development. But I'm certain I brought a root of ginger on my last trip, she said with concern. Oh, it must have fallen out on the way, Sophie said quickly. Don't feel bad. This way we can grab some chickens too, just like you wanted. Belle raised a brow, looking at Adam before back to the maid. But how did you know? Come, we best hurry. It's not too late. If we leave right now, we can still make it there and back before nightfall. All right, Belle agreed, brightening a bit. This could be fun. Beaumont is quite beautiful right now. I'm sure you'll love it. Mama! Mama! Chip cried. Can I go too? Absolutely not, Mrs. Potts said firmly. Master, you're just going to let Sophie leave the ground? Cogsworth said in disbelief, having come to investigate all the commotion. What if she's discovered? Or what if she says something? He said darkly, narrowing his eyes at the metal maid. He had a point. Sophie wasn't exactly known for holding her tongue. It'll be fine, he said, waving a hand in his air. Adam said, waving a hand in the air, but not making eye contact with anyone. Something is definitely going on, Mrs. Potts quietly observed. Though if the master was really okay with it, he must have good reason. Yeah, it'll just look like I'm her beau. Sophie went on, swinging a metal arm over Belle's shoulders, making a few nearby servants chuckle to themselves. The master, however, suddenly seemed a bit put off. Ah, don't worry, my lord. I won't steal her away from you. Sophie teased. What? He stammered. I didn't. I'm not. He trailed off, now terribly flustered as he moved towards the back door. I'm going to go and get the horses ready. As the door shut behind him, warm laughter filled the kitchen. Sophie! Belle rebuked her, flushing herself as she tried to stifle her own chuckles. Now you've embarrassed him. Sophie couldn't exactly grin in her current form, but if she could, she'd probably be doing just that right now. Her plan had worked perfectly. She wiggled her hollow leg a bit, the missing ginger wedged into her toe as the castle disappeared behind them. In a pouch around her waist sat a large handful of coins the master had given her to buy all the paints and brushes that you could find. His words. So, she looked over at Belle, who sat on the wagon seat beside her. Things are going well between you and the master? Oh, Belle said in surprise, blushing brightly. Yes, they are, she said, clearly not trying to smile. Come on, you have to tell me how it happened, Sophie said eagerly. Belle flushed further, but finally grinned. Okay, she said in quiet excitement. As Belle delved into the story, Sophie had to admit to herself that it was nice to have another friend that she could talk to like this. True, Belle was over a decade her junior, but she was easygoing and full of energy in life, something the older servants seemed to be lacking in great abundance. While Sophie had tried to stay optimistic over the years, in truth she had spent much of the last decade wandering around the grand halls in isolation. Besides, given the curse meant she'd pretty much missed her own age of courting, she still could at least be happy in hearing bells. Still, she sighed at the thought. Of all the times in life to get cursed, it just had to be when she was 19. Now nearly 30, Belle knew she was pretty much guaranteed to be an old maid, even if Belle did wind up breaking the curse. I suppose it's a little unusual, Belle was saying. Sophie looked over. The girl was pursing her lips, a small blush crossing her cheeks as she gave the reins a slight snap at the base of the hill. I mean, I have to admit what Papa will say when he returns. Sophie hummed in understanding. Well, it's true our little master turned a bit different than we all expected him to, she teased warmly. But I bet he gives the best hugs, huh? Belle laughed, cheeks growing pink once more. Yes, he does, she admitted before looking back up the road. Oh, we're here. Take a look. Belle? Sophie looked out as they crested the hill, the other side dotted with little houses built into the hills, a bustling square nestled in the shallow valley below. There's so many people! Sophie cried in delight as they rode into town. Sir Giles, do you see them? Oh, look at those cute children! She went on, not letting him respond. And that funny old man. I could have been one of those funny old men, dear Sophie, Giles noted quietly. She only laughed, hopping out of the cart as soon as Belle pulled it up to a stop alongside the road. Despite her excitement, she hadn't forgotten why she was here. Tell you what, I'll get the ginger, and you can head over and pick out some chickens, she told Belle, who was now tying up the horses. Belle looked concerned. Are you sure? She asked nervously. Oh, yes, I've got Sir Giles here with me. she explained. Besides, this way we can get back quicker. Okay, Belle agreed with clear reluctance. Before she could change her mind, Sophie took off, wandering around for a while before locating a trader selling paints. Sir Giles spoke for her, asking the man a dozen questions about the supplies before ultimately deciding to purchase some of everything. Arms full of dozens of paints and of different mediums and other handful of brushes, Sophie snuck behind one of the buildings. She looked to her right, then to her left. With no one in sight, she pulled back her helmet and proceeded to shove the supplies into each hollow arm.
I don't like this,
Giles whispered nervously. Well, we can't have Belle see them. That would spoil the master's surprise, she said in earnest.
But what if someone sees you?
As though on demand, a gasp rang out, and two of them looked over to see a small child gazing up at them with wide eyes. One arm halfway up inside the suit of her neck, Sophie stood stone still as panic swept over her.
Giles reacted quicker. You're next, Sonny,
he deadpanned, causing the child to screech and toddle off. The two of them were silent for a long moment before Giles spoke again.
I'm pretty sure he was too young to talk.
Securing her helmet on quickly, Sophie made her way back to the busy square, anxious to get as far away from the kid as soon as possible in case Sir Giles was wrong.
Wow, what incredible armour!
Oh, thank you, she said automatically, before turning towards the stranger who had spoken. A man stood before her, eyes growing wide in surprise, and Sophie's too would have if she could.
Sacre Dio, I promised the master I wouldn't speak to anyone,
she recalled nervously, as if walking around a suit of armour in a full suit of armour. As if walking around town in a full suit of armour wasn't a little odd already, a woman in one would certainly draw suspicion. The man's shock soon melted into a smile.
Well, I'll be, he said warmly. A real Joan of Arc, no?
Sophie frowned, for once stunned into silence. That was her line. Who is this man? She wondered in amazement, finally taking a good look at him. He looked but a few years older than her, a head of sandy blonde hair and a short beard, a shade darker to match. He was even taller than the armour she embodied, with a broad build and thick gloves covered in grease from his work. Oh, she realised, feeling suddenly shy. He's handsome.
Sorry, he was saying, mistaking her silence for offence. I own a smithy here in town, he explained, nodding his head towards the shop across the street. I usually deal with horseshoes, farm tools, a crude weapon here and there. Don't often get to see such fine craftsmanship.
Wow, you own your own shop? Belle asked brightly. He blushed, smiling a little as he rolled the back of his neck.
Yeah, it was just some good fortune, really. Went from an apprentice to an owner. My old master didn't have any children, and when he passed a few years ago, he left the place to me. Of all people.
You must be so talented, Sophie said sincerely. I doubt he would have left it to just anyone.
Oh, I don't know about that.
He shrugged, though she could tell by the way his smile widened that he was flattered. He had a great smile.
Name's Henry,
he went on, tugging off one of his gloves before offering his hand. Sophie let him take hers, a quiet excitement in her chest as he placed a decent kiss onto its surface. Sophie, she replied sweetly, offering a short curtsy. You seem to redden further at that.
What brings you to Beaumont? He asked, recovering. Travelling?
Yes, travelling, she said quickly, jumping at the offered excuse. Just heading to, Molyneux, she fibbed, gesturing to Belle's hometown. She fibbed, figuring Belle's hometown was a fine enough choice.
Molyneux, huh? He said with interest. You're almost there, then? Used to take that route all the time, in fact.
Really? Sophie asked. What for?
Well, my late wife used to work at the... He stopped, glancing around nervously for a moment, before going on. She used to work in the area, he amended.
Oh, Sophie said sadly, still caught up on his first words. I'm sorry.
Nah, don't worry about it. Been over a decade now, he said casually,
though Sophie had been around enough people who had experienced tragedy to hear the hurt behind his words. Did you have any children? She asked carefully.
I had once, for a few months anyway,
he said quietly, looking away.
A little boy, but I lost him soon after his mother.
How awful, Sophie thought, glancing at the bare ring finger. So he never remarried. He must be so terribly lonely, she realised.
Geez, sorry,
he grimaced, scratching the top of his head.
Didn't mean to give you the whole sob story. Guess that's not very attractive.
he said before his cheeks flared once again.
I mean, not really what a girl, a person wants to hear when they first, meet someone.
He trailed off, sighing in defeat. No, it's all right, Sophie said earnestly. I asked all the questions, after all. Everyone's always telling me to keep my mouth shut, but I guess I never really learned how. He laughed a little, but it wasn't unkind.
Been told the same thing myself. Hey, tell you what, I'd be happy to give your gear some maintenance while you're in Beaumont. No charge for the maiden in shining armour,
he said, that warm smile returning. Sophie laughed a little, though she was soon distracted by the thought of those strong hands running over her metal frame. I could use an oil down, she thought mischievously. A nervous tap-tap from Sir Giles against her hip broke her back to reality. She shook her head. It wasn't the time for daydreaming. Besides, the fact that there would definitely be a problem when Henry figured out she was empty. I'm sorry, but I just don't think we'll be in town long enough for that, she explained reluctantly.
Oh, well, I understand,
Henry said, pursing his lips before looking back at his shop.
I guess I better head back out. But would you look at the wares before we go? I do make a few original pieces when I get the chance. Might find something to suit your fancy.
Okay, she agreed warmly, ignoring the nervous clinking of the sword at her belt. Sophie knew she didn't have the heart in her chest, but she could have sworn she felt something as she followed Henry across the way. Something she knew better than to ignore. Line break. Belle stood surrounded by several cages containing the chickens that she had just purchased. Finally tugging back her hood, huffing for a moment to catch her breath after hauling them to their wagon. She was just about to lift the first into place. A young man approached.
Let me help you with those, mademoiselle,
he said earnestly, grabbing several of the cages and putting them into the cart with ease. Merci, she said gratefully. That's very thoughtful of.
I'll help too,
said another boy, jumping in to help before she could reply and grinning at her ear to ear. Oh, there's not that many, Belle explained. I really think I'll be...
Croissant, mademoiselle?
Belle stopped, a broad man in an apron standing before her, holding a tray of baked goods. Oh, she said in surprise. I don't know if I should.
No charge.
He smiled. Well then, merci, she said, shrugging, taking the sample and heading back to the wagon. Yet another young man approached, holding a mug of something steaming drink, and looked a little pink-cheeked. Or milk on this cold day? He asked shyly. Belle raised an eyebrow in suspicion, suddenly noticing several more men had started to help her load her cart, another half a dozen on their way over with the various goods in hand.
Hey, I was helping her first, one of the boys cried out.
You're too young for her, Pierre.
All right, move it. Let someone of us talk to her too.
Belle's eyes grew wide. Are they talking about me? She thought, paling in embarrassment.
You're from here?
Someone was asking her. I'm from Molyneux, she said absently, eyes scanning over their heads.
Sophie, where are you? Molyneux? That's not far,
said one of the men excitedly.
Man, why aren't the girls around here that pretty?
Another pushed his way to her side. Mademoiselle, you wouldn't mind if I came by sometime and... Before he could stop, someone had pushed him over, and it wasn't a moment later before a full-out brawl had broken out among them. Belle stared at the scene in shock, mouth falling open in disbelief. She glanced back at the wagon, tempted to climb in and take off without a word. Instead, however, she placed her hands on her hips and cleared her throat. Ahem! Excuse me, she said firmly, but this is no way to gain a woman's attentions. The men all stopped at once. They stood slowly, bowing their heads in shame. Besides, she went on, I'm already seeing someone, she said adamantly. She felt herself flush at the admission. A collective groan rang out among the men, and they all slowly dispersed.
Figures, someone muttered. The pretty ones are always taken.
Belle sighed, turning back to the wagon, only to see Sophie now sitting atop, shoulders shaking with silent laughter.
Wow, Belle! I didn't realise you had so many admirers, she chuckled quietly.
Belle paled even further. I doubt I would if they knew how odd I was, she muttered.
Sophie scoffed. Odd is just another word for interesting, she said.
And fun. Belle finally smiled again. I still need to get some chicken feed, she explained, changing the subject. Are you okay to wait here? Oh, of course, Sophie said with even more enthusiasm than normal, settling happily in place as she looked over the busy streets. She must be enjoying her time away from the palace, Belle thought warmly, moving back through the crowds.
Hey, you're Belle, right?
Belle looked up to see yet another man of her path, though he seemed a bit old for her. She sighed. I'm sorry, monsieur, but I'm...
Sophie's friend?
Belle stopped. Did Sophie talk to him? She wondered nervously. She must have by the looks of it. Well, yes, I am, she said honestly.
Oh, good. I was just wondering. He started quietly. Does Sophie... It's just... She wouldn't take off her helmet, and I didn't want to pry, but I was wondering if maybe she's got scars or something.
Belle blinked, taking a moment to register his words.
I mean, I don't mind, he went on. She's got the sweetest voice, and it's been so long since I've felt... He stopped quite quickly, clearing his throat.
Well, Belle started, unsure of how to explain Sophie's predicament.
You probably can't say it. I get it, he conceded. But could you maybe give her this for me?
He asked instead, pulling a narrow parcel from his hip and handing it over to her. Of course, Belle smiled, finally realising what was going on. Who should I say?
Oh, Henry, he replied. Henry Bollard.
Belle nodded. I'll let her know, she said warmly.
Great, perfect. I'll just be off now,
he said with haste, nodding and disappearing into the woods. When Belle returned to the carriage, Sophie cocked her head in amusement. Oh, another gift from your admirers, she laughed. Nope, one from yours, she grinned, handing the small parcel over. From a Henry Bollard. Sophie was quiet, staring at the package for a moment before scanning the thick crowds. Looking back at the gift, she carefully untied the parcel's thin string and pulled the paper back. Inside was a handcrafted handle. Sat a long, sharp blade that Sophie slid quickly from its fine leather cover. Oh, a knife, Belle said uncomfortably. That's, Sophie chuckled at Belle's confusion. He's a blacksmith, she explained. Let me look at some of his weapons he crafted. I said this one was nice, she said warmly. Before looking over at Belle, he must think me a real warrior, she laughed, staring back down at the gift with fondness. He must really like you, Belle said slyly. Do you think so? Sophie gasped. I can't believe it. He was so cute. Didn't you think he was cute, Sir Giles?
Very cute.
He didn't even see me, though, Sophie went on. I mean, my human self. No. He was probably just being kind, she reasoned, even as she held the weapon in careful hands. Oh, yes. I'm sure he gives his handcrafted wares away to everyone he meets, Belle teased. Sophie only giggled, bringing a hand to her metal face as if to hide an invisible blush. I looked over the crowds once again. Belle smiled. It was nice to see Sophie so excited, though a small part of her worried how anything could really come from it. You're courting Adam, she minded herself, but at least he still had a body. Sophie was an empty suit of armour. It was hard to imagine even the nicest of men being willing to accept a woman under those conditions. Besides, she knew Adam was hesitant to trust any outsiders. Belle frowned. This whole curse was so cruel. For all of them. If only there was a way to undo it.
Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll have his bones to grind for my bread.
The words of the story broke through her thoughts. Belle turned to see a small crowd, gathering to hear one of her favourite tales. Oh, a storyteller! Sophie explained. Sir Giles, do you think we have time to listen? Belle said eagerly.
My dear, I've learned by now that I have little say once either of you set your mind to something, he chuckled. And we have just passed winter solstice. Should have a few extra minutes of sunlight. Hopping out of the wagon, Belle and Sophie made their way to the back of the crowds as the storyteller finished the tale of Jack and the Beanstalk. It had always been one of Belle's favourites, and it added an element of excitement to hear it told by an expert narrator among dozens of eager listeners. Though she couldn't quite help but feel, the voice sounded strangely familiar. As the tale concluded and the crowds dispersed, she and Sophie had just turned around when Belle sensed a presence right behind her. Not going to cheat an older woman, are we, dear? Turning around, Belle gasped. Before them stood the very same storyteller she had met on the road home just a few weeks ago. The one who had told her that awful tale she wished forever to forget. What was she still doing here? Grimacing, Belle dug her hand into her cloak. Sorry, she stammered, dropping a coin into the woman's hand. The storyteller smiled gratefully, pocketing the change. I don't believe we've met. Madame Helena, at your service. Belle, she said, furrowing her brows. But, Madame, we have met. On the Northern Pass, she said with a little more than discomfort. Oh, goodness. I'm afraid I've quite forgotten. When was that, my dear? Just last month, Belle reminded her awkwardly. On the road to Molyneux. Madame Helena cocked her head. That can't be right, she mused. You see, I've only come from the south. Been travelling those parts for months now, child.
Belle's eyes grew wide. But you told me a story, Belle said with some desperation. About a beast? She explained, hating the word choice.
A beast,
The woman hummed.
Do you mean Le Petit Chaperon Rouge? Or perhaps even a Barbe Bleu?
Though the latter is a bit too frightening for some of my listeners. She chuckled. No, not those. Belle said nervously. This was definitely the same woman that she had seen that day. Same voice, same hair, same dimpled, wrinkled chin. She even carried the same knotted walking stick in her hand. Everything was the same. Except her eyes, Belle realised. Those were now a dull grey.
It's all right, the woman went on kindly, as Belle's face betrayed her confusion. Us old folks do tend to look alike. Why, you certainly are the first to...
Belle wasn't listening. The words the woman had spoken to her on the trail ringing in her ears.
You be careful now, dear. Wouldn't want you falling prey to this forest's beasts.
Adam, Belle breathed, ignoring Helena's ramblings as she turned towards the forested hills in the distance. I'm sorry. I need to go, she said in fear, cutting the woman off and sprinting towards the wagon.
Something wasn't right. That woman on the trail, there had definitely been something strange about her. But this discovery made those strange things suddenly sinister. Belle, what's wrong? Sophie asked anxiously, following at her heels.
Belle jumped into the wagon's seat, pulling Sophie in behind her before grabbing the reins.
It's that storyteller, she gasped, giving the reins a sharp snap and sending the horses galloping down the road. No, the other storyteller.
The other storyteller? Sophie asked in confusion. What are you talking about?
Belle ground her teeth hard. She's a shapeshifter, she breathed in realization, looking back over at her friend with quaking eyes. And she knows about Adam.
Line break. The fur on the back of his neck tingled, and for the third time that evening Adam spun on his toes, staring into the dark corridor behind him.
Hello? He asked roughly.
Silence. He huffed, turning back around and picking up his pace as he swept through the palace. He'd thought he heard the wagon winding its way down the trail, and was anxious to see if Sophie had had any luck in the village. But as he strode the length of the grand halls and their lengthening shadows, he was unable to shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Adam moved quickly past several tall windows, his massive form reflecting off their surfaces as darkness began to fall over the valley outside. Narrowing his eyes, he stopped abruptly in place. For a split second too long, something continued to move in the reflection behind him.
Show yourself,
he ordered, spinning around towards the clear glass and staring furiously into its surface. Nothing was there, but for his faint reflection and the darkened forest beyond. He growled nervously, grinding his teeth for a long moment, before brushing his cloak aside and striding down the hall. You're only fooling yourself, you know. Adam froze again, his heart flying into his throat. Come now, you asked me to show myself. So, here I am. She was right. He had asked.
But he was suddenly afraid of what he might see. What did you mean, fooling myself?
Adam asked, instead, feeling heavy pulses shoot through his temple as he stood with his back to the window. A part of him knew he shouldn't talk back to the voices in his head, to the people conjured up by a deranged mind, but at the same time he couldn't help it. She just pities you. Adam swallowed roughly.
Who? He asked,
knowing full well the answer. He just knew full well he would see if he looked back into the glass. The old woman stood there now, eyes still shrouded by her cloak, that unnerving smile gracing her lips. She looked like a ghost, body translucent in the faint reflection of the window's surface. How could she not pity you? She prodded. The fallen, orphaned prince, cursed as a child, life sought by the only family he had left. The vision sneered again. The poor girl's heart just can't take it.
Belle cares for me, he whispered,
before sucking in a breath of confidence.
Me, as I am.
She's indebted to you, the woman corrected, raising a thin, wiry finger in the air. You gave her money, food, clothes, a home of luxury, a library, and a mirror to take her everywhere she's always dreamed to see, she reminded him. What haven't you given her? What doesn't she owe you?
Belle owes me nothing, he said firmly.
She knows no other way to repay you besides to give you herself. Adam was silent for a heartbeat.
No, he breathed, feeling the desperation creep into his chest. No, she wants to be with...
She'd do anything to help you. You know she would. The woman grinned wickedly. Anything to repay you.
Stop!
An amused, short bark of laughter escaped the woman's old lips. What? Do you really think she wants to be paid by a beast?
Adam shook his head roughly, taking a step back. I would never!
How disgusting! She cried, a terrible cackle ringing from the glass and echoing down the empty hallway.
Stop it!
He shouted, chest filling with a terrible shame. The laughter only grew in volume, and Adam turned away, claws digging into his scalp as he crouched against the dark stone floor.
It's just in your head, he told himself. This isn't real. It's just in your head.
No, it couldn't be real. He knew his mind was simply playing tricks on him, just like it had with his mother. Yet,
does Belle only pity me?
He let himself wonder.
Does she feel she owes me?
He hadn't considered it until now, but suddenly it made perfect sense. Why else would she agree to court a hideous creature like him?
He should have known. He should have known it was too good to be true.
You're pathetic, the woman spoke again. He didn't say anything to that. No use contradicting the truth. Instead, Adam sat in the dim hall, cowering like a frightened dog.
It's true, he realised.
That old, familiar darkness Belle had driven away with her presence, suddenly filling his heart once again.
I'm just fooling myself.
Line break. Adam! Mademoiselle, whatever's the matter? Belle raced through the castle halls, eyes tearing through the darkness, heart pounding from a swift ride and a fear of her new discovery. Lumiere hopped along her heels, lighting the path. Something's wrong, she gasped. Where's Adam? The master was upstairs not half an hour ago, mademoiselle, the maitre d' explained in confusion. He can't have gone far. Without another word, Belle raced towards the stairs, taking them two at a time and leaving the candelabra behind in her wake. Adam! She shouted, gasping for breath as she reached the top of the upper balconies. Adam, where are...
Belle!
She turned around in a heartbeat. Adam stood in the archway behind her, though his eyes were cast to the floor. Belle rushed over, throwing her arms around him as far as they would go, burying her face in his chest. Thank goodness! I was so worried, she gasped. Adam lifted a weak arm, barely returning the embrace. Confused, Belle pulled back, looking up at him in concern. He frowned, still not meeting her eyes. Why isn't he asking what's wrong? She wondered nervously. Belle suddenly thought of the red-eyed woman on the trail. Her bright red eyes, in such contrast to the grey she had seen in town. If the red-haired storyteller was truly a shapeshifter, could she take on other forms too? She looked back up at him, chest flooding with panic. Why isn't he looking at me? Adam? She said nervously, reaching out careful fingers to turn his face towards her. He didn't resist, a pained expression crossing his face for a brief moment. But he did look down at her, and his eyes were still blue. She let out a heavy breath of relief. It is you! But Adam looked confused, but it quickly passed as he dropped his gaze once more. The worry returned to Belle's chest, but for a different reason. Adam, what's wrong? His frown deepened, but he didn't reply. Did something happen? She pressed. Was someone here? His eyes grew wide at that, and he turned back quickly to face her.
What did you say?
He breathed. The look on his face, the revelation in town, it all tumbled over her at once. The storyteller, she gasped, gripping his shirt as the words spilled out. I saw her again, and I asked for the end of the story, but I shouldn't have, for it was such an awful lie. And then she was in Beaumont, but it wasn't really her, and her eyes were grey this time, and that means the other one I must have seen about you must have been a shape.
Belle, slow down,
Adam said anxiously, finally lifting both paws to rest on her shoulders.
You're not making any sense. What storyteller?
Belle suddenly remembered he had no idea of whom she was talking about. She told us a tale in my village. About someone like you. He scratched the fur on his chin.
I think you mentioned something about that when you first came. I was worried it might be the enchantress who told you the tale, given you mentioned a rose. But when I asked you about her, you told me the storyteller was old.
Adam suddenly trailed off.
a look of terror sweeping over his face.
What is it? Belle asked in fear. Instead of replying, Adam grabbed her hand with one paw and a nearby candle with the other, and started quickly in the opposite direction from where she had come from. He led them through the dark, winding corridors, blue eyes darting between the shadows and tall windows lining the halls of the upper balcony. Belle barely managed to keep up, breathing heavily as they finally stopped to stand in front of two grand doors. Adam pushed them open quickly, revealing a large office decorated with reds and browns. From what Belle could see from the candle's small light, the walls were lined with shelves, filled with books from floor to ceiling. Even more were stacked haphazardly in several piles along the floor. She barely had a moment to take it in before she was led to the grand oak desk.
Here, Adam said,
pulling out a cushioned chair for her to sit in, before tucking open one of the drawers. He snatched out a sheet of parchment, and then started digging through another drawer for a piece of charcoal. What? Belle asked, utterly confused.
Can you draw her? He asked, setting the materials down on the desk before her. The old woman you saw.
Belle stared at him for a long moment before nodding firmly. Though confused at his request, she trusted Adam enough by now to know he had a good reason for asking. She began immediately, the light of the single candle illuminating her work, but was soon distracted by an irritating scratching noise from behind her. Belle looked up. Adam was hovering beside her, claws running over the desk's fine oak and leaving small wooden shavings behind as his eyes fell unfocused to a point across the room. Adam! Belle whispered. He didn't respond, clearly consumed by whatever was bothering him. Adam! She said a little loudly, reaching over to stop his movements. He jolted a bit, looking down to when her fingers rested on his. He looked down at her, blinking rapidly.
Yes?
That's kind of driving me crazy, she admitted.
Oh, sorry,
he said, clearing his throat and folding his paws behind his back. The sudden stillness of his claws, however, was almost immediately replaced by an absent brushing of his tail against the shelves behind them. Belle sighed, recognizing defeat, and trying her best to focus on the drawing regardless. She wasn't sure why the old woman's face had stuck out in her mind so vividly. Perhaps it was the odd grin, or the look in her eye that suggested she knew more than she let on. Either way, Belle soon had a fair representation on the parchment before them. Looking up, she realized Adam was staring at the drawing in horror. What is it? She asked anxiously. He reached for the sketch in silence, lifting it carefully from the desk, and continuing to stare at it in shock.
What colour were her eyes?
He finally managed. They were red, actually, she admitted, and strangely beautiful. I'd never seen anything quite like it. Adam sucked in a loud breath, but didn't reply as he set the page back down and moved across the room. He paced the rug beside the cold hearth once again, then stopped, staring at a tall mirror leaning heavily against the wall. He reached out, resting his fingers against the glass for a long moment before pulling his paw back and forming a tight fist.
I thought I was seeing things,
he said to himself. Seeing things? Belle asked anxiously, moving across the room to reach for his fisted hand. What are you talking about?
I thought I was going mad, he breathed. But it was her. All along, it was her.
The way he said the word was enough. The Enchantress, Belle realized. He's talking about the Enchantress. Of course, she should have seen it herself. What other person both knew about Adam and could possibly be capable of shape-shifting? It made perfect sense, after all. The Enchantress had changed forms of everyone who lived here. What would stop her of changing her own? Belle recalled the storyteller she had met on the trail. The witch must have stolen Madame Helena's form and been using the position to spread fear about Adam to those surrounding villages. But why?
The beast held a dark secret. A secret the young woman would only learn of once it was too late.
Belle frowned. It had been a frightening tale, indeed. Frightening enough that, had she heard the story before meeting Adam, she may never have trusted him to begin with. She was trying to scare me away. Belle realized. She was trying to scare everyone away, to ensure that anyone who happened upon this place would flee, leaving Adam and the others isolated here forever. But why? She wondered again. Wasn't a curse enough? Whatever the witch's reasons, Belle was immensely glad she'd skipped the end of the tale that early autumn night. Though the story was wrought with inconsistencies, she recalled, perhaps I would have seen through it then, as well. She hoped so, though she could never know for sure.
Fooling myself,
Adam was saying under his breath. He huffed.
Well, I have been a fool, that's for sure.
Belle shook herself from her thoughts, glancing back towards the drawing room across the floor before looking up at him. So, you've seen her too? Here in the castle? He nodded slowly.
A few weeks ago, and again tonight.
A few weeks ago? Belle frowned. But why didn't you tell me? He was silent for a long moment.
They called her insane, he whispered. My mother said she should be sent away to the city.
Belle thought of the time Gaston had threatened the same to her own father. She knew too well the reputation of the Maison des Lunes, and she doubted the asylums in Paris were much better. Adam grimaced, looking back over at her.
I guess I was nervous. If I told you I was seeing things, you might...
Leave? He cast his eyes aside.
I'm sorry, he said in shame. I guess I really am pathetic.
What? Belle asked, frowning. Who told you were...
Wait a minute, he said suddenly.
He was staring back at the mirror, a look of fresh, terrified realization on his face.
If I were truly seeing the Enchantress the whole time...
Belle's eyes grew wide. Then your mother was too, she breathed.
He turned back slowly towards her. My God! Her death was never an accident, was it?
Belle's heart caught in her throat. If Adam was right about this being the Enchantress, then that meant she had been the one the Queen had sought all the night she had disappeared. She had been the one who had led his mother into the woods that winter night. Queen Jacqueline was murdered, Belle realised in silent horror.
All this time I thought she had been sick.
Adam stopped, growling under his breath. He brought a paw to his temple, claws digging into his scalp, his other hand quaking in her grip. Belle had seen Adam upset before, but this was different. This was anger. She wasn't afraid, though. In truth, Belle would have been more concerned if he didn't react this way. They stood in silence for a long time as Adam clearly struggled to make sense of it all. Belle wondered if he were holding back tears, but she didn't say anything as she brushed a quiet hand over his arm.
I'm sorry,
he said at last, finally looking back over at her.
You shouldn't have to worry about this, Belle. Not after
losing Maman, she realised. Of course I'm going to worry about it, Adam, she said softly. I care about you. He pursed his lips, looking away as though deep in thought once again.
If my mother wasn't seeing things, then maybe you were never sleepwalking,
he said suddenly. Belle thought of the dream of her own mother, gripping her hand and leading her with an uncharacteristic urgency through the strange gardens. To a Rose, whose importance was now very certain, though the reasons why remained a mystery in Belle's mind. Sacre bleu! She said in fear. Was that the Enchantress too?
Perhaps, Adam said darkly. Did you ever see her eyes?
Belle thought for a long moment. No, she wouldn't look at me directly, she realised, feeling sick. They stood in silence again, their quiet thoughts filling the darkness. Have we simply jumped to conclusions? Belle wondered. Yet the more she thought about it, the less likely any other scenario seemed to be.
This doesn't make any sense,
Adam said, shaking his head roughly.
She shouldn't be trying to stop me from... I mean, she's the one who told me to.
He trailed off, grinding his teeth.
And now she's come to you. Oh God, what kind of danger have I put you in, Belle?
He said, his eyes wide with fear. Adam!
Perhaps...
He stopped, sucking in a breath through his teeth.
Perhaps you should.
I won't leave you, Belle said sternly. Strangely, his expression seemed to fall at that.
Belle, he started,
his eyes looking sad and almost confused.
Do you only pity me?
What? She breathed.
Is that why you're here? Is that why you agreed to...
He grimaced, looking down at their hands, where they were joined. No, Belle said firmly, starting to understand. I mean, as much as I hate everything that's happened to you, that's not why I'm here. I'm here because... She flushed, suddenly embarrassed. She didn't know why. It wasn't as though her feelings were exactly a secret anymore. But because I'm happy here, she admitted. Here, with you. Despite the ineloquence of her response, Adam's ears perked up. Besides, Belle went on, recovering. You should know by now. I won't do anything I don't want to. The hint of a smile crossed his face.
That's true, he conceded with some amusement. And you'll do anything you want to do, likewise.
Belle finally smiled to herself. She couldn't argue with that.
Just, please know, you don't owe me anything,
he went on seriously, swallowing roughly.
Know that I don't expect anything. At all.
Belle nodded. He could have meant a number of things, and perhaps he did. But he hadn't needed to say any of it for her to know. She trusted Adam in more ways than one. And she knew, without a doubt, that he wasn't the kind of person to take advantage of her. As his arms finally wrapped around her like she had been longing for since her return, the frantic beating of Belle's heart finally started to calm. Despite all the terrible revelations of the past hour, she let herself relax into his embrace, if just for this moment. You're my best friend, she whispered, feeling emboldened by everything that they had been said.
Mine too,
Adam said without hesitation. He paused briefly, but went on.
My very beautiful best friend.
Oh, Adam! She cried, flushing profusely, as she pulled back and pressed her hands against her burning cheeks.
Sorry, can I say that now? He asked, honestly. I've always wanted to. It just seemed as though you didn't like it.
You'd always wanted to? She thought, burying her face against him to hide the blush. I don't mind if you say it, she admitted shyly. I guess it just bothered me when that was all people saw. Or when it was all I was valued for, she explained quietly. She felt gentle fingers brush against her back as she went on. And whenever Gaston would say it, well, let's just say he wasn't looking at my face, she said with discomfort. Adam growled.
You know, I'm serious about you locking that boat. I'm serious about locking that.
Belle said sternly, scolding him for his profanity.
Sorry, he said. He is though,
he added under his breath. Let's just worry about the Enchantress for now, Belle went on. In fact, we should probably tell the others what we've discovered.
Adam nodded, sighing. And here I thought we were going to have a normal Christmas.
We still will, she assured him, grinning. Gingerbread and all. For some reason, Adam looked a little sheepish at that. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one. Another long one. Oh boy, okay, that was full. I really loved that trip into town. And Sophie meeting that blacksmith. Okay, that was flipping cute. I mean, a blacksmith and a suit of armour, that's just perfect. But also the fact that he gave her a free knife and Belle and Sophie teasing. I feel good for Sophie and Belle. It's nice to have a female friend who's sort of in the same mindset, you know? And all those revelations. I mean, those two are smart, aren't they? Horrifying realizations to make, but still very, very smart. I'm impressed. And I like how Belle put it all together. I mean, I love how intelligence is their thing. And also communication. Like, they talk openly about their issues. It's impressive for me. So many stories base themselves and drama around miscommunications, but this? I like this, you know? I know we're only 12 chapters in, but you can't deny that's lovely. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe, check out my other videos, and make sure to have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in another video. Bye!